And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Hello there, I'm meteorologist Peter Chan coming to you from the National Weather Service, and this is your Alaska aviation weather outlook on this Thursday, September 5th, 2024. And as of late this Thursday morning, we have an area of low pressure that's come up out of the North Pacific, and it's weakening over the lower portion of Cook Inlet, the entrance there. There's other low pressure energy back along the southwest coast, southeast to Bering Sea, that's going to shift and pivot over Kodiak Island into the western Gulf on Friday, and that'll be the next system to impact the Gulf. Right now, though, we've had the influence of a frontal band work its way up along the Gulf Coast in the Panhandle, with some areas of moderate to locally heavy rain. And some of those pockets of locally heavier rainfall will still occur where you have some terrain enhancements with the increasing elevation there along the coast into Friday morning. But gradually, things should begin to wind down here along the Gulf Coast. Even as that next low takes shape on Friday, we expect the low to be out here over the western Gulf Friday afternoon. So IFR conditions will be extensive along the Gulf Coast, as well as areas of the inner channels, the intercoastal mountains there of the Panhandle, British Columbia. We find IFR conditions scattered along areas of the Arctic coast, especially northwest coast, Utqiagvik down to Point Ley, and then through the Bering Strait along the southwest coast, north side of the Alaska Peninsula, central Aleutians. For Friday afternoon, that secondary weaker low will be located here. Still a band of IFR conditions along the Gulf Coast, along the Kenai Coast, outside of Prince William Sound, Yakutat into the northern Panhandle. We have IFR conditions expected along the Arctic coast and still hugging there along the southwest coast, especially out over the Bering. VFR conditions, though, anticipated across much of, say, the Yukon and Tanana River valleys across the central and eastern interior. Saturday morning, as that weaker low just continues east, it's going to fill by Sunday, and so the showers and activity will be winding down in this time frame. More importantly, come Saturday, we have a stronger front, a Bering Sea front with a low up in Siberia. This front will have wind with it, as well as some lower ceilings areas of light to moderate rain, a band of light to moderate rain as that pushes inland on Saturday. There'll be some gale force winds, potentially some higher surf and higher water levels along areas of the west coast, especially at high tide. And then for Saturday afternoon, improving conditions south central, still some lingering MVFR conditions along the Alaska range. Pocket of IFR there in the northeastern Gulf Coast, just offshore, but a broad area of IFR conditions along areas of the west and southwest coast, all the way from the Bering Strait down through Kuskokwim and Bristol Bays, as well as the lower half of the Alaska Peninsula and Aleutians. And again, be some rather breezy conditions associated with that front. So coming up on Friday, though, Anatuvik Pass in the east central Brooks Range, as well as Adigan Pass, should generally remain MVFR during the day. Further south, westward, Lake Clark and Merrill along the west arm of the Alaska Range, generally MVFR conditions are forecast to hold. Rainy Pass, also MVFR. Windy Pass could see a brief interval of VFR, but generally MVFR conditions should hold on Friday. Same thing for Isabel Pass, and then farther east, Mentasta Pass, air a bit drier that way, less in the way of moisture penetrating further eastward. I expect VFR conditions there. Tanita Pass, MVFR, trying to become VFR in the afternoon. And then areas around Portage Pass, generally MVFR conditions Friday, though the west entrance should become VFR by afternoon. And then, of course, across the Panhandle, northern Panhandle, Chilkoot and White will hold on to IFR conditions as lower cloud cover, lower visibility, and ceilings as a result of some areas of lingering precipitation. Freezing levels are going to be lowest in a couple of spots. One thing, when you look at the freezing level map, where you see the lowest freezing levels, you tend to have a trough of low pressure. You can see this broad trough over the mainland extending back towards Siberia, eastern Russia. Lowest freezing levels aloft are out here across eastern Russia, with the surface freezing line coming up to about the Bering Strait and then running up there along the Chukchi Sea. Warmest temperatures aloft, though, are to the western Canada, south end of the Panhandle, especially Haida toward Vancouver Island, 12 and 14,000 feet respectively. And then back to the west, we do have, with that Bering front working its way east, there is a push of milder air with freezing levels getting back up around 12,000 feet toward the central and western Aleutians. Now, precipitation will still linger in areas along the Gulf, and as a result, we find potential for some moderate icing above 8,000 feet around Prince William Sound along the northeastern Gulf Coast. Some isolated icing above 7,000 feet in areas of the interior, above 6,000 feet along the Arctic coast, and then with that stronger frontal system out here across the Bering Sea, we find moderate icing above 8,000 feet in the lead, kind of ahead of the occlusion, and a little bit of a shrinking warm front that's going to get pinched off. And then as you get back toward the western half of the Aleutians, freezing levels come up well above 12,000 feet. And looking at the jet stream pattern for Friday at 30,000 feet, broad trough right over the mainland. We have jet cores 125 knots just south of the eastern Gulf there off of the Panhandle, Haida coast, and then also on the backside, northerly winds upwards of 120 knot jet max over the tip of the Alaska Peninsula, and then another area, a jet core of 125 knots over the southwest quadrant of the Bering Sea. At 9,000 feet and 700 millibars, we have a pretty broad belt of southwest winds coming in off the North Pacific into the Panhandle, Western Canada, anywhere from 30 to 40 knots. We have northerly flow, 35 knots over the eastern central Aleutians, tip of the Alaska Peninsula, but a broad belt of west-southwest winds, generally 40 to 50 knots with some pockets of even 55 to 70 knot winds there just to the west of the Aleutians, western Aleutians. And then at 3,000 feet on Friday with that weakening low circulation that's going to be sitting here, it's the secondary low as it works its way, so maybe some winds upwards of 25 to 30 knots at 3,000 feet. Backside, some 30 to near 35 knot winds across the Alaska Peninsula. And then behind me, this is where we have a broader belt of stronger winds, anywhere from 35 knot gales upwards of 55 to 65 knot winds along this particular frontal system. And then, of course, you guess it, where's the most significant turbulence going to be on Friday? We're going to find moderate turbulence out there in the western half of the Aleutians. We'll also have potential for some moderate turbulence along the far eastern Aleutians, around Dutch Harbor, into the tip of the Alaska Peninsula, surface to 3,000 feet. Still some lingering turbulence potentially over the central Panhandle, surface to 6,000 feet. And then in the far north, perhaps isolated turbulence along the Arctic coast, especially from around Wainwright on up to and just east of Utqiagvik.